Good afternoon, Leo.
Hi, Pastor. How are you?
Doing well. Leo, I want to thank you for coming in and doing this 2020, Stories of 2020. You've had some things happen in your life over the last couple of years, and yet 2020, you said to me, had made an important difference in your life. And I guess the question is, what is that story that has made the greatest impact in your life?
I would say the story is about a men's small group that we started, and we are 6 strong, and it started a little over a year ago. And when I was approached to be the facilitator, I said, oh no, this is not going to happen, not on my watch. And I was like, why not? And my wife had just passed away a few months before then, and mentally, emotionally, I wasn't ready. And they said, oh, okay. Next Sunday during greeting, boom, back, asked me again. And then the third Sunday they asked me, I'm going like, oh Lord, come on, give me a break here. And that week, about 2 in the morning, the Lord kept working on me, and I finally said yes. And it's been the best experience because I needed them, and I think in a way they needed me, and we've just had a great year together.
So you mentioned to me, Leo, that there were a number of things that maybe influenced or triggered you into facilitating or leading this small group. What specifically were those things?
The first one was one of my brothers called from Seattle, Washington, that goes to our church. Okay. And he really said, I need a small group. Not I, Leo, but he needed a small group, and planted the seed why he needed it. And we worked through that, and it started to unfold from there, and it's just grown miraculously.
So when he said he needed a small group, did you know at that time you needed a small group?
No, I think I was in denial, to be very, very honest. But I thought, well, if I can help him a little bit, and I asked him in detail, why do you need a small group? What things are you looking for? And as we talked and that unfolded just between the two of us, then it started to grow.
So there were a number of other things that have happened this year. One in particular was the Spiritual Emphasis Weekend. Dr. David Watson came and spoke to us in October. What did he talk about in regard to small groups that struck you and the group that you are with right now?
Well, Dr. Watson was a great motivator for our group. We were meeting every week, but it was like a slow fire burning, and he just threw gasoline on the fire. I mean, he was so articulate, and he talked about the Wesleyan movement, and he talked about the class groups, which is 10 or 12, or a small group of like 5 or 6 that really bond and dissect things. And we go like, oh, I think that might be something like what our group's working toward. Several of us got his book, started reading, and we've written goals for a new year, and it's going. So that just, we think it was a God thing that he was here when he was, and it's really motivated us to move on for the new year coming up.
Yeah, Wesley had 2 different groups that met. One was the class, and one was the band.
Right.
You would see yourself more as the
band.
The band group.
For 2 reasons. Number one is we're a small group. We are 6 strong, but we are a very small group. Number 2, we just don't meet and read a book. We usually have a book, or we'll study a book in the Bible, but it's not a come along, read along type. This was our assignment. Now, let's branch out from that. What did we learn that we can practice, we can put into use today and this week? So that's been really, really helpful. The other thing we do is we have a 2-minute reflection every week. We go right around the group, and each person shares for approximately 2 minutes either something from the pastor's sermon or a devotional or something we've heard on radio that's been a nugget that's helped us in that week. And then toward the end of our gathering, we have prayer requests, and people are pretty intimate about sharing struggles and or successes, and we see God just unfold miracles in front of us as we look back over the last year. It's been really awesome.
Well, cool.
Yeah, it
Would
is.
you recommend this for other people who are looking for a small group? Would you recommend this type of an intimate small group, or just a larger group that would study a topic for a time?
I think that depends on the individual person. For Leo, I like the intimate small group, and I've been in both groups, and have gotten a lot of both groups. But I find ours is more intimate in that everybody shares equally. Each person in the group facilitates about once a month, and it's nothing spectacular. It might be a PowerPoint, it might be a Bible study. People just share their heart, and when a problem or challenge comes up at work or in their family, they'll share that. Where with a larger group, I don't think that always happens. People are a little more guarded. This group is really relaxed, and we've really bonded really closely together.
So what are your thoughts in regard to the upcoming year regarding a small group?
Oh, wow, I don't know how much time I have, but I'll try to condense this. It was suggested to our group by one of our people that we write goals. And I thought, oh, I'm back in school, write goals and objectives for this next year. And believe it or not, this was about a 2-month process. And each person had homework, and they had to bring a goal or two that they'd like to see the group work on. And then we requested they back that up with a Bible verse. So if one of our goals was to read the Bible in 365 days, it came out about a week and a half before Pastor presented from the pulpit. So we didn't think that was ironic. We thought that was cool. But now a Bible verse study to show thyself approved. So we use that. So that's one of our goals. We have like 6 goals, but that's one of them. Each person contributed, and it's hard to explain, but there was no controversy. Nobody's goal was bad. We included all 6 goals. We have a mission statement that's a combination of all the scriptures, and we have it all printed up. We have it now on little cards to carry in our wallet or put on. It's just cool, and it's because everybody worked on it. We all have ownership, and we all want to see that succeed, and we're just like ready to go. Come January 1, we're already getting ready to go.
Well, cool. Well, thank you for sharing. I know 2020 has been an interesting year with all that's gone on
Right.
and all that you've experienced, Leo. We want to thank you for sharing that with us today.
Well, thank you for asking me. Good morning, Pastor. We've now switched positions, so this should be really interesting and intriguing. So I understand earlier this year, 2020, that you changed churches, and help me understand how that all came about.
So, interesting question, Leo. In our itinerant system as United Methodists, we are moved based on what the bishop desires for us and for the churches. And at this point, at the beginning of the year, I had pretty much figured that I would not be moving churches. The long-term arrangement that God and I had would be that I would serve 3 churches. That's what I asked God to do. Serve just 3 churches, Lord.
I understand.
I had a friend who had 5 churches within his first maybe year 8 or year 9, and I just wanted to be in 3 churches, longer appointments. And so I figured I'd probably be in Heartland another few years, and then maybe, Lord willing, I would move to another church. And our DS, Jody Flessner, called and told me about Gaylord First being open, and that the bishop was asking me to consider moving to Gaylord to become the pastor at First. And so, of course, I got on the web, did a little searching. Who's Gaylord? What does Gaylord know or love or believe in? Those kinds of questions. And I talked with my wife, Lene, and so we're talking back and forth. And then we had our introductory meeting with the SPRC. And that was a really good meeting, I felt. From my perspective, I know I've since chatted with a couple of people on SPRC, but I really felt God's hand was in on this particular move.
Well, that's great. That's great to hear. I think we can move on to the next question. You pretty well answered that. I'm wondering, in the light of COVID and the challenges that's brought us this year, how have you handled it, and how do you feel the congregation here at First Methodist has handled it?
You know, COVID's been unlike anything we've ever experienced in the church, probably at least in my lifetime. I don't remember a pandemic. I think the biggest thing we could probably compare it to would be 9/11, but that was a singular event for a period of time, whereas COVID has been really since the end of January through the whole of this year. And so for most pastors in the United Methodist Church in Michigan, right before Easter, the bishop sends out a letter and says, no in-person gatherings.
Right.
And I know for us down in Heartland, we scrambled because we did not have a live stream or audio equipment to put in place something really quickly. And so it would be just me, my laptop, and sitting in front of it and having the Holy Week services. It changed everything. It changed the way we do ministry. It changed how we not just worshiped for me as a pastor, but also for everyone else in the congregation. How do we worship from home? Usually you don't worship from home until you get to a point in life where you're not able to get up as early and do the things you want to do. And so at this point in time, it changed everything in the church. How we do ministry, how we reach out to people, how do we do stewardship. All of those questions had to be answered. And I think Gaylord First had some real step-ups in that they were already live streaming. They already had cameras and sound equipment in place and people to do those things. So that was really cool coming here. And then the other real benefit was we had outdoor services to start. And so if you remember, Leo, when you got married that day, if there was any one point you remember, you would probably say, no, it just flew by. And that's what it was like that first Sunday. I mean, I remember one person being in charge of the ministry for SPRC, welcoming the pastor within the service, but then there were all these people coming up and giving me a Bible, a gift, water, all of these different symbolic gestures of a new ministry or a start to a new ministry. But I couldn't tell you who they all were at this point in time. But it was really nice to be out on the front lawn and to do ministry out there, to have a service to worship God, to have a small band, to do those kinds of things.
That's interesting to hear your perception, because the church and even our small group was praying for that transition and that service and how each of us would interact with you and to welcome you and do it in a spiritual way. That was really neat. So I'm glad to hear that. I don't remember what the closing was. It was going to be about COVID, but I've already covered COVID.
No, COVID. So as you've started ministry here, what's your vision for the church going forward?
So as you've started your ministry here, Pastor, what do you see as your vision as we move forward together for you and for our church?
Well, certainly I want to grow in my relationship with God, and that's the burden that God has put on my heart, is to help other people grow in their relationship with God. And so through these days, as we've slowly opened the church, allowing people to come in and to provide services for both those who are really more vulnerable and services for those who are less likely to wear masks, to provide those avenues for people. I think we've done a good job there. Of course, small groups took a big hit, especially our Wednesday night group and any type of Sunday morning activity, fellowship time, even the adult Sunday school class that was meeting. So there have been some real hits to the church. And I think one of the learns for everybody especially those who have been really faithful throughout their lifetime, has been the knowledge that I really miss being in a place where we're gathered together to worship God. Certainly there's a social aspect of seeing your friends and loved ones throughout the services, but then now we've come to a place where we recognize, wow, I don't know how I could do without this. And so really we're trying to provide avenues for people to continue to meet together. Hopefully everyone in person. Hopefully this vaccine will really help people and help people to feel comfortable coming back into a larger group. And of course we've all become more sensitive to washing hands and, you know, if anyone's sick or anything like that, to maybe not go out. But as far as the church itself, I think for those people the church has become more and more vital. And so we want to get back to vital ministry and then really to find those people who have been without God for such a long time.
That's pretty cool. So I think what I'm hearing you say is that Christian fellowship is an integral part of our spiritual walk with God.
It is. It is, Leo. We need to be in fellowship with one another because fellowship, especially in terms of being together, studying the Bible or doing spiritual activities, allows us to have discussion, allows us to talk with one another, as Proverbs says, as iron sharpens iron, we'll grow stronger together as opposed to stronger apart.
I have just one more quick question.
Sure.
Maybe commercial time. What's your thought or philosophy on small groups?
Integral.
Okay.
They're integral to the life of not only the church, but of the individuals within the small group.
Okay.
Because without the small group, then we begin to lack accountability. Right. And accountability is what causes us to grow. But we have to be willing to say, I'm willing to be held accountable so that I will grow. I think ultimately we all want to grow, but without the accountability, we oftentimes will tail off and wane. And so it's important for us all to seek to be in some type of fellowship group or small group, especially as it comes to being around studying the Word of God.
Very neat.
Hello, my name is Amanda Greenman. I am the oldest of the Cook family, so I have 7 brothers, 3 sisters, 2 sister-in-laws, and a really cute nephew. And then this is my husband, Nick, so I'm married to Nick, and we have 4 children. We have Caitlin, Anna, Noah, and Emily. So for us, 2020 started out really well. We found out in early February that we were going to have Emily. And then of course, everything with the year started the way it was. But the thing that we'll remember most about this year is actually not the virus and everything that has taken place since then. It will be the night that our daughter was born. So on October 7th, Emily was born at 1:26 in the morning. So at I'm going to say around 11-ish, I kind of figured that she would be born that night, but it wasn't until 12:30 that I told Nick to call Mom, who was going to be present at her birth. And so she was born an hour later. And for me, labor was very normal. I didn't have any complications in labor, and nothing felt out of place. And after she was born, the moments after she was born, I nursed her and held her, and we talked a little bit about her name. So again, at that point, it still felt very, very normal. It wasn't until about, and they can correct me if I'm wrong, about an hour-ish after her birth that things kind of started to change, and I was losing too much blood. And for me, I remember everything up until the time that we left the house in an ambulance. And after that part, my memory is kind of foggy, which is why I have these two here to fill in the gaps of the next 6 days. That I just have little memories here and there. So I'm going to let Nick take over and explain what happened after that point.
Yeah, so from that point, the roller coaster really started. Talk about being totally helpless. As a husband, watching your wife go through childbirth obviously is hard to see, but then the next events that unfolded after that were just unbelievable. It really hit me when she was there in bed saying, "Hey, Nick, you need to take care of the kids for me." And I was in total shock. I was like, what is going on here? And right then and there, I mean, the midwife called the ambulance. The ambulance came to the house. The ambulance stayed in the driveway a lot longer than I thought they should have. They were looking for veins, and being that she lost so much blood, it was difficult to find veins. And eventually, they just left without getting the IVs in place, which was very good at that point, because it had been almost 15 minutes they were sitting there in our driveway. I remember I was trying to follow the ambulance, and they just took off. I couldn't even keep up. They were flying. Got to the hospital, got up into the ER waiting room, or whatever it was called, and doctors, nurses, they were all very calm and just trying to find a vein and get the process started. At that point, really the only concern was to try to stop the bleeding, and the worst case scenario that the doctor explained to me was that they might have to do a hysterectomy, where they would remove the uterus and she wouldn't be able to have kids anymore. We're fine with 4, so I mean, obviously that's not the best procedure, but it wasn't life and death at that point. So I think she went into the operating room about 5:30 or so on Wednesday, the 7th of October. And it was probably 2 hours or so before I heard anything. And during that time, I'm sitting there with the midwife in the waiting room. I'm sending out texts to the Outlaws, my small group, and Pastor Jordan, and just kind of asking for prayers. I didn't think it was going to be too serious or anything like that, but still wanted to get the word out that we needed some prayers. So I think it was around 7:30, 7:45 or so that morning. The nurse comes into the waiting room and says, "Hey, I got somebody on the phone for you." And I'm like, okay. So I went to the nurse's desk, and the doctor there in the ICU room just dropped a bomb on me. She started by saying that Amanda had lost pretty much her entire blood volume. So I think at that point they had transfused 13 units of blood, and the body only requires 10 units of blood. So she had a total oil change there prior to even 7:45 in the morning. She also went on to explain how, because of the amount of blood loss that she had, her body just started coagulating all over the place. That resulted in her needing CPR for 40 minutes. And when I heard that on the phone, I about dropped. I mean, that was a total shocker. I go from, okay, this is just, I mean, it's not a good possible procedure of a hysterectomy, to this is life and death. They are trying to keep her alive. That doctor couldn't stay on the phone long because she's still in critical condition. They need all hands on deck to make sure she stays alive. So it might have been a couple minute phone call, and after that, I mean, I broke down. I mean, you hear your wife is fighting for her life, and again, you're totally helpless. There was nothing I could do. So I mean, at that point, I started to reach out to people, parents, family, friends, and just asking for prayers.
Yeah. So, like Nick said, everything was normal. I was there, present at the birth, and I've had 12 babies, so watching her and monitoring her during that time, there was nothing that really gave us reason to be concerned until, like Amanda said, about an hour after, and something just wasn't right. And so in the meantime, I was home with a new baby, and we thought that Amanda was going to be gone maybe a couple hours is all, and then she'd be back home. So, but I felt like if Emily got hungry, obviously there was nothing I was going to do. So we called Rebecca, Amanda's sister-in-law, Eric and Rebecca has Lee, and we knew that she could nurse. So I called Rebecca and said, would you mind coming in case Emily gets hungry? So she said, of course. So she came right over, and so she was there. And my really good friend, Teresa, called me. She works at the hospital, and it was at 7:30. And she said, Juanita, things are not looking good for Amanda. You need to come in. And I remember saying to her, what do you mean it's not looking good for Amanda? I don't understand what you're saying. And she said, you need to come. Things are not good. Amanda is not doing well. And I was hearing her, but at the same time, it really wasn't sinking in what she meant. She wasn't doing well. So then they had come in and talked to you about taking her someplace and Gaylor did a wonderful job, and really all hands were on deck, and we were able to stay in contact with them over the next 16 days of being in Grand Rapids. But they did an awesome job, and we really give them many praises for the work that they did and the caring that they showed to her and to us, and we're very thankful for that. But they had talked to Nick about needing to get her to a hospital that just had more resources. They had made 3 trips from Traverse City to bring blood products for Amanda during that time, and they just knew they needed to get her someplace else as soon as it was safe to move her.
Yep.
So
yeah, and as soon as it was safe, I remember the doctor actually coming in and saying that they contacted the helicopter, and the helicopter was actually going someplace else, and they diverted the helicopter to come pick Amanda up and take her down to Grand Rapids. So I believe it was around 1:30 or so that afternoon when the helicopter took off and left for Grand Rapids. I asked a number of times, I even had talked to the pilot, say, hey, can I ride? No, you can't ride. There's not enough room in that helicopter. And I think there was a staff of 4 or 5 in that helicopter, so it's a packed ship. But when they did leave, we watched the helicopter fly away, and we immediately, with my parents and Tom and Juanita, we went back to our house, kind of said our goodbyes to the kids, packed up, and that was a very emotional time. I remember I was driving into the driveway, and if you know the Cooks, you know there's a lot of people involved in that family. I could barely get my car into the driveway to get into my own house, but it really was a blessing to have all those people there in support. We said a little family prayer before we all left and went down to Grand Rapids.
Later that afternoon, one of the adult classes that would meet on Wednesday night, ladies group, decided that they were going to just spend some time in prayer for Amanda. Amanda would normally attend that group on Wednesday night. And they talked with Jordan and said that they were just going to open it up to anyone who would be interested in praying. And Jordan thought, why not just open it up to the whole church? Jordan and I talked, and we decided that we would have, instead of a regular Wednesday night activity with the kids zone and adult classes, that we would have a prayer vigil for Amanda. Amanda, by this time, is down in Grand Rapids at a hospital. My last conversation was that she wasn't doing well, that they were going to actually at 6 o'clock, which would be the start of our prayer vigil, at 6 o'clock they were going to be attaching leads to her around her head, to her forehead, to see if there was indeed any brain activity. There was some concern by the doctors that there was no brain activity. She wasn't responding to them. And so we decided to have a prayer vigil for Amanda at 6 o'clock, and it was amazing. Again, when we think of stories of 2020, the big stories, it's not just the United Methodists that gathered. We had 70 people from various denominations. Promise FM had prayed for her and had cast that prayer request to their audience. So all of a sudden, many people in northern Michigan, in the Upper Peninsula, are praying for a young lady they don't know and praying for her very life. We had Catholics, Baptists, Methodists, non-denominational people. We had 35 or 60, I can't remember how many people watching online as we had this prayer vigil. It probably lasted about 35, 40 minutes. But it was a powerful time of just Christians gathering together, people who love Amanda and her family, just gathering together to pray for her. And that was an important time for our church also, to come together to pray for one of their own.
And once I got to Grand Rapids, Juanita was talking about that time frame here in Gaylord, but I think the real shocker for me was when we got to Grand Rapids. I was met by a doctor there, and first thing he asked was, do you have anybody with you? And I was like, well, no, you wouldn't let them up because of COVID. He's like, okay, well, they can come up. And I was kind of suspicious there. And when my parents got up there, Juanita and Tom were about a half hour behind. But when my parents got up there, the doctor took us into a conference room. And there was 6 other doctors in that conference room. They all had their own specialties, so the heart doctor, the lung specialist, kidneys, liver, OBGYN, they were all there tending to their different specialties. And they talked about all the different challenges each system in our body were facing because of lack of blood flow and so forth. And the neurologist went last. And he basically said that even if all these doctors with all their different specialties can keep all her different systems and organs going, there's a very good chance that if her body's alive, her mind most likely won't be. And that, they didn't really give much hope. And I don't know if that's their job at that point in time to kind of prepare you for the worst, but there wasn't a lot of hope in that conference room at that point. And I was with her for, like I said, maybe 15, 20 minutes, and then Tom and Juanita arrived, and I told the doctor, there's no way I'm going to be able to explain what's going on to Tom and Juanita, so we need to have another conference meeting with them as well, so they're filled in. And we sat down, and pretty much I had to hear what they were saying one more time. And that was even more difficult, because I'm sitting there with my wife's parents and hearing that their daughter has an extremely difficult chance of survival. After the meeting, the one thing that really stuck out after those doctors had left was the first thing Juanita said was, we need to pray believing. I'll turn it over.
Yeah. Of course, I was praying and all the way down, and I don't think I've cried so much in my life, but the one thing that I just felt like the Holy Spirit was speaking so loudly to me is that you need to pray believing. And I remember I had turned on the prayer vigil that was going on here, and we were listening to that, and I remember I just felt like it was audible to me that God said, you need to pray believing. That's faith. And I remember I turned to both Nick and Tom and I said, we need to pray believing. We are going to believe in her healing. We are going to believe it. And just to back up just a moment, when Nick and Amanda had chosen Emily's middle name and Joy, and I remember Amanda showing me Emily and saying, "Mom, doesn't she just give you joy?" And I said, "She sure does." And she was just beautiful. And later on, that Joy was so significant, that middle name, because of the Bible verse about joy coming in the morning. And it was very difficult, as Nick said, to see Amanda, because when we first came in, they were putting probes on her head, and they were wrapping her head in a Band-Aid. And I remember, as her mom, I said, "What are you doing to her?" They weren't really giving me a lot of answers. They just told me they weren't sure if she was having the seizures or not. And that was really difficult to watch her doing that. And so then they took us out, and like Nick said, and I remember the doctor saying that we were probably going to have to make difficult decisions the next morning. And I remember thinking, I still do not understand how we could possibly be here right now, and how this could be in the situation that we are. And again, that Holy Spirit was just so present and so audible, that pray believing. And we had so many people were praying all over the United States, all over other countries, all over. We just had literally thousands and thousands of people, and so many stories of people prior to even Amanda being sick. A friend of mine in Texas actually woke up in the middle of the night, right when this was all happening, and God just stirred her to start praying, and she didn't know why and who she was supposed to be praying for. And as she was praying, our family came to her mind, so she specifically prayed for us for like 2 hours, having no idea what we were right in the midst of what was happening. And it wasn't until later that day, and you just see God's hands in our situation, prior, during, all the prayers. I mean, we flooded heaven's gates, that's for sure, with pleading for her life. And we were so blessed to have him give us, for us, the greatest miracle we could ever be given, and that was Amanda's life. One of the most awesome things is at 5:30 that morning, when Nick came into the room, and I was holding Amanda's hand, and I was talking to her, and I said to her, "Amanda, Nick's here," and she turned her head. It was the first time she had moved and had shown any sign, even though I had talked to her all night, asking her to squeeze my hand. And it was then that she turned and looked at me and fluttered her eyes, and her eyes opened. And then Nick came around, and he spoke to her, and she squeezed his hands. And it was just moments later when the doctor, I don't think he believed us at first. We were so excited. And the doctor, we told her, she just woke up, and she squeezed my hand, and she squeezed Nick's hand. And the doctor came around, and he again said loudly her name. And Amanda did turn and looked right at him. And she proceeded to squeeze his hands and gave him a thumbs up. And then probably really key for him to realize that there has to be some brain function here was the fact that he asked her to move her right foot, and she did. And I remember saying to Nick and Tom, because at this time they allowed Tom and I and Nick to be in the room because Amanda was in such a critical condition. They allowed all three of us to be present. And I remember saying, I could just jump up and down. And I remember the two of them said, well, go ahead if you want to. But that was just, for me, it was just, I could feel God, and I could feel him saying, pray believing, and joy is going to come in the morning. And 5:30, that was the most joyful morning and the most joyful sight we could have ever asked for. So we were extremely thankful. And the one other thing is that I had sent a text out to, we had a group text, all of the kids and everybody at home, And the one thing I said is we have to remember to say thank you. We don't want to be like the other lepers who forgot to say thank you and only one person. So everything, all of these blessings and every single good thing, the fact she's alive, but every, as they said her heart was fine, as they said all of these things, we just needed to keep saying, thank you, Jesus. Thank you. And I just kept reminding the kids, just remember to say thank you. And also to pray specifically. I believe firmly in praying specifically. So I kept it updated, the Facebook page, as far as when the doctors would say this was our next concern. I would post that, and to just feel that presence of all of those prayers. And you could just feel it, that God had us. And even though we were being faced with each of those different situations and changes and whatever, but just to feel that hand upon you, that from all of the prayers, that God goes right there with us, and that peace that He gave to us.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different little signs that you could tell that God was with us. I mean, I think it was one of the nurses in the ICU wrote up Hebrews 11:1, which is, now faith is confidence in what you hope for and assurance in what you do not see. And then one night, I can't remember which day it was, but I was coming back from our Renucci house, which is like a hotel connected to the hospital, and I was in an elevator, and I think we were only on the 3rd floor, so it wasn't like a long elevator ride. And somehow I got talking with this guy in the elevator, and he's like, well, where are you from? And I was like, Gaylord. He's like, oh, I'm from Onaway. And then his face kind of grimaced a little bit, and he was like, wait, you're not the husband of the wife that just had the baby and had some really difficult times, are you? And I said, yeah, how do you know that? And he's like, well, I'm from Onaway, and I listened to the Promise FM, and I heard all about it, and I've been praying for you guys. And my jaw just dropped, and he walked out of the elevator, and I didn't even get a chance to tell him I'd pray for him if I knew what was going on in his life. But just those little things, you could really tell that God was with us the whole time.
And, speaking of that, the Promise FM was just incredible. Pastor Paul was awesome. I mean, just everyone, our whole community. So we're talking a lot about the hospital stay, but realizing that here at home, they have their 4 children, and Eric and Rebecca moved into their house basically to take care of. Emily was the main priority. Ashley stayed every night because she had told her sister she was going to take care of her children, and she took it seriously, and she wasn't going to leave them. Everyone just rallied together. There was not an afternoon lunch meal or supper that had to be prepared for how many weeks? Like 6 weeks,
I think, yeah.
6 weeks or more. And so many people, just was an outpouring of
Yeah, it was just amazing to witness, and I don't know if we'll ever be able to thank everyone enough, but from the bottom of our hearts, I mean, we are so thankful for our whole church family and the whole community for the support that they provided.
It's now been a few months. It's the week after Advent, or actually the Sunday after Advent. And when I think of the stories of 2020, I think of how wonderful this all turned out for Amanda and Nick and Emily and the kids. And I'm reminded again and again, as we just celebrated Jesus' birth, what God can do, and what we cannot say that we did on our own, but what God does to make His name known to the world around Him. In this case, with a young lady named Mary, a virgin, she gives birth to the Son of God. No doubt in my mind that God's hand was all over that. When I think back to Amanda's story, again, there's no doubt in my mind that God was all over that. It was only God. And may God be glorified. may your 2021 be a wonderful year with the Lord.